basketball can be a mysterious sport.
The team whose logo is in this envelope will have the first pick in the NBA draft.
Watch James. Now wanted a timeout, but too late to get it. And 5 minutes go up on the clock. Overtime here in game one.
Will Giannis win a title in a Milwaukee Bucks uniform?
It's hard for me to say that, Jay, considering how loaded the Lakers are. I don't know if you've been watching Taylor Horton Tucker over the last couple of days.
But what if those mysteries could be solved? What if those conspiracies are reality? The hoop truth is out there. Can you handle it? Welcome back to the Hoop Truther podcast, where we are finding the deepest mysteries on a weekly basis in the NBA. We've got 2 weeks left in the NBA season. We're recording on April 3rd. It's a Sunday. A week from today is Dr. Dre, Nick Andre ATR on Twitter's birthday. We've got a special guest coming on, and we're going to have some fun. I will tease that later on in some tweets on our page. But what you can look forward to in today's episode is Game of the Week, Team of the Week, and then a very special guest is joining the Hoop Truther Truth Circle. What do you call it? The Trust Circle. Yeah, Trust Circle. That we will be discussing the Hawks season overview as well as some off-season previews, and then our top three for most improved and coach of the year. Finish off with some final thoughts and the plug zone. Like I mentioned, joining us as always, Nick Andre at Nick Andre ATR on Twitter is joining us as always. Dre, how are you, sir?
I am good, and I am also depressed because it is hard to watch basketball with March Madness and everything. But I took a small break from the NBA just because the Warriors are just stressing me out, man. It's just been one thing after another. I know we beat Utah Saturday night, but we still stink. And yeah, that's about it.
Another comeback win for or another comeback loss for the Utah Jazz, where they've blown 20-point leads in back-to-back games to the Los Angeles State Warriors. And I guess we can start there. This wasn't part of the docket, but both of us saw these rumors that if there's a first-round exit, they might blow up the whole damn team. Like, the entirety of the team might be gone. And specifically rumors with Rudy Gobert. Let's dissect this only a minute or two, not too long. Rudy Gobert, two rumors. One, that the Mavericks should be very interested in his services should he become available, and that the Toronto Raptors would inquire. It doesn't sound like they have as much interest as the Mavericks, but they would certainly inquire about the cost of Rudy Gobert. Dre, how do you feel about that?
I think it's needed, honestly. I mean, I think Utah, considering what happens in the postseason this year, I think they've already did their due diligence with this team, honestly. With Dallas, I can honestly see Dallas. I think that will possibly be a really good fit alongside a guy like Luka and the other guys. I think Dallas is in need of another big, so I definitely can see that happening. And even if Mitchell may head out, I did see some rumors about Donovan Mitchell heading out. I don't know if that'll actually happen or not, considering that he did sign it. He did sign an extension about a few years back. So
yeah, it's contract.
We don't know, but I think Utah really needs to change, honestly. I mean, it's kind of like, we mentioned before, this is a team that, has a good regular season. We obviously know that they'll be playoff bound, but what's next after that? We saw it last year with the Clippers when they got cooked, obviously with Kawhi going down, and then of course Paul George taking over. So a lot of people do not really believe in this Utah Jazz team except Utah fans themselves. So if whatever happens in the playoffs this year, if they don't make it out the first round or so, it's time for a change.
I fully agree with your sentiment there, and they refuse to do anything at the trade deadline. I mean, they acquire Nickeil Alexander-Walker, but he's not playing minutes for a contender anytime soon. And there were veteran perimeter defenders out there, which is the number one thing that Jazz have, and they just didn't do it. So I guess they're buying into this year with the knowledge that they'll blow it up if they don't succeed. And I agree. And I also agree with the thought of trading Gobert. I am a Gobert apologist to the extent that I don't think he deserves as much hate as everyone does. I don't think he's like a number one option. I don't think he can be like your second or third best player on a championship team. I'll say that much. I think he can be your best defender on a championship team for sure, but I don't know if he can be. He's the second best player on Utah, and I don't think that's going to work for a championship team. And I think you'd rather build around Donovan Mitchell. Is he going to ask for a trade if they lose? Probably. It's been looking that way for a while. But if you trade the guy that he pretty easily you can see doesn't like for some other pieces, he'll buy in for at least one more season. What I don't know is what Gobert is worth. I don't know what he would get from the Mavericks, because just to get off of Kristaps Porzingis' contract, they had to acquire two guys that were considered spoiled goods, and they've both played well since they got to Dallas. No disrespect to Davis Bertans and Spencer Dinwiddie, but they don't necessarily have like a ton of picks or young talent that they can throw Utah's way. Like, are they going to take Maxi Kleber, Tim Hardaway Jr., and a couple of picks for Rudy Gobert? That would probably be disappointing. And I do like the fit in Dallas. My thing is that if you don't like that Donovan doesn't pass you the ball, what do you think Luka's going to do, who is, a hero ball type of guy and has the talent to back that up? In Toronto, though, that intrigues the hell out of me, man. They're one of the best defenses we've got in the league, one of the most versatile, and they just don't have any big men. Kem Birch is like the biggest guy they have, and he's like 6'7", 6'8". Chris Boucher is a little bit taller, but he's thin as hell, so he can't really play center in this league. And Scotty plays a lot of center, as well as Pascal Siakam. You add to a team with a length of defenders like OG Anunoby, Pascal Siakam, Scotty Barnes, and you give them a Rudy Gobert, it might be one of the best defenses we've seen in the entirety of the NBA, like ever, especially if you give Nick Nurse a guy like that. I'd like to see it to the extent that it won't hurt the Bucks' chances, which it might, because the Raptors have had our number. But if they were able to land Rudy Gobert, I was actually talking about this like 2 weeks ago on the pod, I think that they would be the perfect fit for him if he was available for trade. Let's move on from that, though, and talk about the game of the week. I've got two by the same team. How about you, Dre?
I have one, and it landed on a Thursday night. I'm sure the majority of the people will watch. I'm sure my colleague here, Agu, was definitely watching. The defending champs found themselves in Brooklyn in a matchup against the Brooklyn Nets themselves. Kyrie's there. Kyrie's available to play at Barclays now. Shout out to Kyrie. But the game was about the Greek Freak, who had 44, 14 to 6, which let's also not forget to mention he did pass Kareem as the number one scorer in Bucks history. Shout out to you, Giannis, for that. But this is really a great comeback victory for the Milwaukee Bucks. Obviously forcing overtime, and then of course just being able to dominate. But I'm saying, like, the two keys for me was really showing the clutchness of Giannis Antetokounmpo, hitting that final three to force overtime, and then hitting the two clutch free throws to win the game, to seal the game for the Milwaukee Bucks. So I don't know if this will possibly become a first round matchup, but if it is, it'll be like one of the if it is, it'll be one of the craziest things. And I'm gonna say, like, Milwaukee is by far, in my opinion, a better overall team than Brooklyn. No disrespect to the Nets. We know they have KD, they have Kyrie, but when you look at this team defensively, guys like obviously Giannis, Drew Holiday, they got Brook Lopez back in the middle. Having those key guys defensively is really going to take them up a notch. And I keep telling everybody this team has a really high chance of repeating coming this year.
I agree. I think at their top, like at their absolute peak, KD and Kyrie are a better duo than the Bucks have. But the Bucks at their best have that third guy that the Nets were supposed to have with Harden that they just don't. I mean, Drew at his absolute best is closer to Kyrie than a lot of people want to admit, not offensively, but the defense that he brings and the shot making that he's brought this season. And then Chris Middleton at his best is a better third player than anyone on the Nets roster right now. It's not fucking Patty. It's not Andre Drummond. It's none of those dudes. Not even Ben Simmons if he's healthy, which I don't think he's going to be. But like you mentioned, it's KD. It's Kyrie. So the series wouldn't be easy, I don't think. And the last game, Thursday's game, wasn't easy either, which, of course, I do have listed in my game of the week. About 8 minutes left in the fourth quarter. Chris Middleton gets tossed. Whether you agree with it or not, you shouldn't hit guys in the air. It can always look ugly, and he got hit with a flagrant 2. I think even Ja Morant tweeted that he disagreed with the call, but it doesn't really matter. What mattered was the guy that so many people want to call Milwaukee's true closer and the only clutch player on the roster was out. in a game that they were close in with a contender. They go down by 9, and they easily could have given it up, say, hey, Chris Middleton got ejected, we don't have to. Instead, Giannis takes over. I think it was 15 straight points in the fourth quarter that he scored to bring it back close, and then the step-back three. I mean, you ever seen some shit like that, Dre? Like, I understand we see that shit from all the time from these players that hoop and are like born scorers and shooters, but it was a natural looking step back from Giannis where he pulls it back on Andre Drummond, who's of course expecting the drive, and just hits that three. Like, it's not bouncing around; it goes straight through. I never seen no shit like that in my life from Giannis, even though he's hit step backs before in that moment, and it really showed that he's going to be one of the best of all time, man.
It's special, man. I mean, even right now, I'm watching the Bucks Mavericks games like right ahead of me. You can just see like the development of his shot making and and his creation is hitting step back shots. I'm just waiting until he just really perfects that, because I mean you see that it's there, it's coming, but it's not there like as of yet. He still has his struggles as a perimeter scorer.
Yeah.
But once it comes, once it gets there, it's lights out. Like it's over for the rest of the NBA. And I've me. I mean, I've already made my hot take saying that Giannis will finish his career as a top 10 player of all time.
Yeah.
And that just might solidify it. Like, what I'm saying? Like if he adds a better perimeter game to his game alongside winning a few more championships, he's definitely gonna be in that list.
Yeah, I would say the mid-range is there. He's hitting faders from the post pretty easily, and he hit a mid-ranger to seal the deal in Philly on Tuesday that we'll talk about in a second. I think the mid-range is pretty much there. The three-pointer's still coming along, but he's 27, and he's gotten better every single year. I'll talk about – so I had that game, obviously, and then on Tuesday of the same week, the Bucks take Sixers. Harden healthy, Maxey healthy, Embiid healthy, pretty much the whole roster, and Giannis again gains them, hits that mid-ranger at the end to put them up, and then blocks Joel Embiid with 2 seconds left on a putback. And the most impressive part, I don't know if you saw this, he blocks it with his left, and the ball is coming back, and Embiid's going to get that rebound. With a couple of seconds, he can put it back up and try to win the game. It's coming down. Giannis with his right hand in midair hits the ball away out of bounds, and then they review it for a goaltend. But if it hadn't been called a goaltend, Embiid could have gotten that rebound and put it back up. But Giannis hits it with his right to hit it out of the way, out of bounds, so Embiid doesn't get another shot at it. Just one night, it's a block to win the game. The other night, it's a step-back three to hit it into overtime and free throws to clinch it. Giannis has solidified the MVP, but we're going to talk about that in the future week. My team of the week is, of course, the Bucks. They're finally healthy. Brooke is back from back surgery. Pat Connaughton is back from broken finger surgery, and both look great. Both look like as they should, especially Brooke. I didn't know what Brooke was going to look like after back surgery at 33, but he looks just as good as he did last year.
Really good, really good.
Which is like a top 10 center in the league. Like, I don't know if you guys want to say that or not, but he is. Like, it's not that hard to discern that he is. And he looks like it. Dre, did you have a team of the week?
Yes, I'm going to go with this team. This is a team that hasn't been mentioned as a team of the week yet as far as this pod, but I'm going to definitely show them a little bit of love because, they really impressed me this throughout this week, and that's the Los Angeles Clippers, who went 2-1 this week. Obviously, they beat the Utah Jazz in that come from behind win, which was a Paul George return. He finished the game with 34 points and 6 assists. Really shot the ball really at a high level. Obviously, they lost that game to Chicago where DeMar DeRozan had dropped 50, but they did end up coming back. I think the next night after that in Milwaukee, obviously there's no Giannis, but they end up blowing out the Milwaukee Bucks. Obviously, that game led by Robert Covington, who somehow dropped 43 points with 11 3-pointers. So the Clippers, as we mentioned, they're definitely a playoff team, and they're definitely up there as far as trying to make some noise happen. Shout out to Ty Lue, who's definitely done a terrific job, and in my opinion, they had a really solid week this week.
It is a good week for them all around, and Paul George just came back. Like, I don't think Kawhi is coming back, but let's say the Clippers make it out of the first round. Who knows what's going to happen? I mean, we didn't think Paul George was going to come back this season, and then randomly on like a Tuesday night, they listed him as probable, and he showed up. And that is scary for any team in the Western Conference because that fully healthy Clippers team, in my opinion, is probably the best team in the West. With those two wing guys and all the secondary guys they've got, Norm Powell, Robert Covington, Ivica Zubac, Marcus Morris, Reggie Jackson, so many, Luke Kennard, so many players that you can throw out there around two top 12 players in Paul George and Kawhi Leonard. It's just unbelievable. I think that's what we've got for Team of the Week. We're going to be introducing a new member of the Hoop Truther Trust Circle in just a few moments right now. And joining the Hoop Truther Trust Circle now, covering the Atlanta Hawks for Sports Illustrated All Hawks, as well as the author of Kobe Bryant's Sneaker History, 1996 to 2020, to talk about the Atlanta Hawks season overview, as well as the MIP race and Coach of the Year race. It's Pat Benson at Pat_Benson_Jr., one of the hardest working men out there. I'm seeing posts on Sports Illustrated All Hawks now nearly every single day, if not multiple times a day. Pat, welcome to the show, sir. How are you doing?
My guys, thank you so much. I'm good now. You're too kind with the intro, and honestly, I'm excited to be on the pod. This is such a dope podcast, so I'm a fan right now.
My first question real quick, and you're allowed to be offended, you're allowed to yell at me if no, but may I address you as PB&J on the show?
Oh, of course, man. That's been the deal since like kindergarten, so that's all good.
Glad to know that my nicknames are up to spar with the kindergarten kids that you went with. Let's start real quick on the Hawks. Quick season overview. Here's some quick hitters. Currently 41-37. They're 8th in the Eastern Conference, 7-3 in their last 10, including 5 in a row, capped off by a good win over the Nets on Saturday. That's March 2nd. We're recording on Sunday morning, the 3rd, if you're wondering. Dre, let me hear a couple of thoughts on the Hawks before we get Pat in the mix.
Well, let me just say, last season I think the Hawks kind of shocked the world. Obviously in the postseason, beating the New York Knicks. When the Knicks were really the Cinderella story of last season, and then of course just being able to get through a really tough Philadelphia team led by Joel Embiid and Ben Simmons. Obviously, we all know the infamous Ben Simmons Game 7 story, but then also they got to the conference finals. It was honestly pretty competitive against your Milwaukee Bucks. Honestly, yep. I mean, I know they lost in 6 games, and I know Trae Young was dealing with an ankle injury. But for that team to be able to get through a 6 game series against you guys was pretty impressive. Obviously, they had the coaching change. They had Lloyd Pierce mid-season a year ago. Then they changed over to Nate McMillan. Obviously, Nate McMillan preaches defense and obviously has a good system there. But obviously, coming into this year, they didn't really carry the momentum for most of the year. I mean, obviously, Trae Young's had a pretty solid season, but things just haven't really been able to click for most of the year, even though they are in the play-in tournament this year. But to me, over the last month, the Hawks, they seem like they're starting to slowly get it together. I'm obviously having that win last night over the Brooklyn Nets, obviously overcoming that KD 55-point explosion. So it might be the best time right now for the Hawks to be clicking, especially with the postseason right around the corner.
I guess we can start there. They made the conference finals last year, and Bucks fan to heart myself, but it was competitive. It wasn't a nothing series. It was also one of the stranger series we saw in the postseason with both Trae and Giannis, the best players on their respective teams, missing games with injury and being limited when they were out there. And this season, I guess there was a lot of pressure on them to compete. I think we see this in the NBA every single year. A young team that doesn't necessarily overachieve, but realizes their potential sooner than you would expect them to, and they regress the next season simply because that's how progression in the NBA goes. It's 2 steps forward, 1 step back. Very rarely do you get an Orlando Magic, Shaq, and Penny that gets to the finals in their first season and is on the verge of winning their first game before some weird stuff happens. Usually you have to go through some bumps along the road. So I guess that's my first question to Pat is, they've struggled with some injuries and some chemistry, but what would you say are some of the factors leading up to what some would consider a disappointing season for the Hawks compared to last year? But in terms of overall progression, they're right on track, I would say.
Yeah, as always, y'all nailed it. There's very little I can add to that. Y'all clearly been paying attention. The only thing I would add is that according to Clint Capella, the team lacked excitement. He's mentioned a couple times that entering the season that they just didn't have that same juice. Because if you'll remember, I know as a Bucks fan, you remember, they went deep into the summer last year. They're playing into July, and then they turned back around and were on the normal NBA calendar. And so that gave the Hawks about 2.5 months off. And I sympathize with that, but the Bucks and the Suns, they got even less time off. And, they're both excelling this season. Both those teams are significantly older than the Atlanta Hawks. So I have trouble really buying that as an excuse, fatigue or lack of excitement for a team whose starting five has an average age of 24 and a half years old. So, that's been the big frustrating thing for everybody in Atlanta this year is this team has been inconsistent, and at times, they look bored or out of it or whatever the case is. But like y'all said, they're starting to turn it on now, and it's as long as it's not too late, it's the perfect time to start getting hot.
They are currently in the A seed, guaranteed a play-in spot. Not that it's officially guaranteed, but their records seem a bit too far away to lock into the playoffs, playoff seeding 6 seed or higher. So they're probably going to be in the play-in. And the number one reason the team exists in the relevancy in the NBA is Trae Young's continued excellence. Some raw stats for you, very simple stuff. You don't need a calculator. All-star starter. This season, 28.2 points per game, 9.6 assists, which is a career high on 46% from the field, career high, 38.2%, which is a career high from three, and 90.4% from the free throw line, another career high. 10 40-plus games this year and one game at 56 points, a loss. Fourth in points per game, third in assists, the only player in top five for both this season. And on Saturday, as we mentioned, drops 36, 10 and 6 to beat KD's 55. Pat, listen, you mentioned that we're paying attention. We are, but we're not covering the team. Can you try and encapsulate Trae's excellence this season briefly?
Yeah, if you look at his Twitter feed lately and you listen to his post-game comments, there's a recurring theme, and I plan on writing about it this week, is he wants his respect. He wants his flowers. And I've said before that 2021 was his villain origin story. He got passed over for All-NBA. He got passed over for the All-Star, the Olympics. And I think 2022 will be the year that he starts receiving his flowers, just because he just took his game up a whole nother level. In spite of the rule changes, everybody was expecting his game to fall off a little bit. Right. But if anything, it's forced him to evolve for the better. And that's the type of player he is. And, y'all know, and likewise, we're all Kobe stans in here. But, I mean, he's really got that sort of killer mentality. Mm-hmm. And I spoke to one of his trainers who knew him since he was a kid. And he said even as a kid, he was like that. So really the sky is the limit for Trae Young. He's just starting to scratch the surface.
Considering how well he has played this year, and considering that the Hawks have struggled a lot, like, do you think that people should really give him that respect? And then obviously, putting him as like a first team, second team, because obviously, when you look at like the MVP list, there's been Jokic, DeMar DeRozan, Ja Morant, Joel Embiid. A lot of people will say that Trae statistically has had a better season than those guys, but a lot of people may not give him that respect just because the Hawks haven't really had that great of a season, or haven't been as consistent that season or throughout the season. Like, do you think that Trae should still be considered first team All NBA or second team All NBA despite that?
Not only do I think he should be first team All NBA, I think he should be in discussions for the MVP award, just because the MVP award, obviously, it is, over time grown to be basically best player on the best team. Right. That wasn't always the case. And if you go back to the beginning, in fact, some of the first few winners, they were on bad teams. So I thought that was interesting when doing the research for that. So I think it's a given. First team All NBA. Check out this morning, and he's second in total points scored, first in total assists this season. So I don't think anybody's doing it like him. He's the best point guard in the league. and perhaps the best. He's playing at the highest level right now as well.
It's unbelievable levels that he's reached, and the roster, despite them being an eighth this year, has talent on it. So much talent that they had to offload someone with genuine talent at the deadline that we'll talk about a little bit later. But who's typically considered Trey's running mate on this team is John Collins, who has had his fair share of complications this season. I don't want to say issues, but first let's start with a story that has been going on for a couple of years now. It's not necessarily new. This is from January of 2022. John Collins frustrated with his role. He's been frustrated with his role since the arrival of Trey Young. His usage rate has gone down for, I believe, the third straight season, and now he's dealing with some injuries. But before we talk about the injuries, there's players in this NBA that can be heliocentric. If you're not aware, it means you can just run the entire offense through them. And the reason you do that is not because they're a ball hog, just simply because everything good that happens on the court happens because of them. You've got Luka Doncic, you've got Trey Young. Obviously, LeBron James is one of the quintessential examples of this. And it can rub players the wrong way. You do need to make sacrifices to be in that system. But there are adjustments that you can make. I mean, John Collins was a borderline all-star a year or two ago, has been improving, like his scoring bag improves, his shooting numbers have improved. And I personally think that if he's on the market, you overpay for a guy like that in a trade. So I guess my thought on you is, yes, Trey is one of those players that you have to put the ball in his hands, but would you agree with John Collins being unhappy with his role, or do you see a bigger picture here where if he accepts it, they can reach higher heights?
You know, honestly, I think it's a little bit overblown. Chris Kirshner of The Athletic, he's reported on this a few times, and I believe his reporting is accurate. Obviously, you know, JC wants a larger role. He's an NBA player. They all do. Every guy down to the G League wants a larger role. So I believe his reporting is accurate, as he's written a few times. But I do think the drama might be a little bit overstated, just because John Collins has stated that he's happy in Atlanta. I think he's in the ideal situation for himself because he really can't create much with the ball in his hands.
Right.
And I think Trey Young's the ideal facilitator and playmaker for him. So I think I think he's in his best situation, ideal situation here in Atlanta. So I'm really not too concerned about that. Obviously, his name's come up in trade discussions, and it got pretty heated there right before the trade deadline, before the general manager Travis Schlenk kind of stepped away from the precipice of blowing the team up.
Right.
And I do think it's good that they kept Collins. I think he's absolutely a keeper. And as you mentioned before, each year he seems to get better. He comes back. He knows what he needs to work on. He used to, really be limited on defense. He's improved that. He's adding his outside shot. And at 24 years old, I'm confident that he'll continue to improve.
Collins is something, man.
I'm so glad you cleared that up. I'm so happy that you did, because honestly, this has been going on for about at least a few years now, where it's the chemistry between Trey Young and John Collins isn't there. John Collins obviously isn't happy playing with Trey Young, but I don't know. It's like, for me, when I watch Collins games, I don't really see any issues, or I don't really see like any animosity towards one another. So I'm just happy to hear that you cleared that up.
It's not Donnie and Rudy out there, You don't see like clear animosity between them, and I hope not, because the guard big combos in this league, if you're an electric young guard, you'd like to have an explosive big. Garland's got Mobley, Ja's got JJJ, and Trey's got Collins, among others, whom we'll cover in a second. Real quick on Collins. Has been dealing with some injuries, was playing through a nasty, kind of a gruesome finger injury, if you saw it on Twitter. We showed up the picture a couple of episodes ago. We're not going to show it again, but he's also dealing with a sprained foot at this point. This is from yesterday that you wrote about the CEO saying that he's been practicing, working on a limited way, and might be able to return for the playoffs. How do you feel about that? Do you think he's going to be back? Or even if he can, do you think he should, or with the multiple injuries he's suffered, do you think he should be taking a break at this point?
Well, to answer the first part of that question, I really don't have any inside intel, so it's just me guessing. I think I wouldn't see them bringing him back for the play-in, but should the Hawks advance to the playoffs, then I think they're open to that. And then secondly, big men with foot injuries, that's scary, especially a guy whose game is it's so much of it is predicated on his explosion.
Right.
You have to look beyond this year, and they just signed him to a 5-year, $125 million contract. It may be best suited just to shut him down for the season.
Yeah, I don't disagree. And big shout outs to John Collins for getting his money. That was a small question mark at some point. For some reason, some of these franchises don't want to pay their young bigs. We'll be keeping our eyes on the Phoenix Suns and DeAndre Ayton later this summer. Dre, anything else on Collins or anything else you wanted to bring up?
No, it's not on Collins, but I wanted to ask Pat. So I read an article. This is from early January, basically talking about the Hawks defense. I think at the time they were ranked 28 in defensive rating, and I believe since then, now last night they're ranked 15th. So obviously they're not in the top 10, but they are making some small improvements as the season has progressed. So what have you seen as far as defensively from the team?
They just seem more locked in. Honestly, I don't think Nate McMillan has changed much in terms of scheme. The rotation's about the same. If anything, he's tightened it up more. They just seem more locked in, and that seems to be the message coming out of the locker room. So they haven't done too much to change it, honestly. And I think they are done sleepwalking through the season. And this is more accurate. This is really where they should be. They shouldn't be near the bottom where teams are tanking. That's not who they are. They're past that point. So I think middle to lower third of the pack is more accurate, where they should be on defense. So I think that's where they belong.
We've covered two of the stars on the Hawks, and they're both young. You mentioned Collins and Trey. There's three other players personally that I would like to cover in terms of their continued development, starting with Deandre Hunter, who has had his complications on the court in terms of injury, just issues here and there, but nothing massive. The prototype is what you want, especially on this team. But in the modern NBA, a guy that's two-way wing that can play killer defense and hit threes is the prototypical wing that you'd like to finish off your team. I keep mentioning the Suns, but you've got Chris Paul and Devin Booker and DeAndre Ayton, who are these massive contributors, but it's all glued together by Mikael Bridges. And you want a Mikael Bridges on your team. If you're going to succeed in the West or in the East, you're going to match up with wings, elite wings. Imagine going up against the Celtics without a single wing defender. It's something that the Nuggets found out when they had to guard the Suns without any perimeter defenders. And DeAndre Hunter figures to be that. What have you seen in his season this year, and what do you see for the future for him?
He's certainly talented. He's the best wing defender that the Hawks have, and he's got the prototypical 3-and-D archetype, which is great. Statistically, he's regressed a little bit this season. Injuries have defined so much of his young career. 2 knee surgeries on the same knee last year. I personally wonder what that's taken away from his game. Even just the slightest amount can really make a big difference. So that's something that concerns me. Luckily, the injury that cost him a lot of time this season was like a wrist injury. So that's unrelated. So that's the good news. Only time will tell. He fits perfectly next to Trae Young, and that's why he's going to get a payday here in the next either this summer or at some point down the road from the Hawks. They're going to keep him, and he's definitely a glue guy. You saw him last night. He was playing a big role defensively. So I like him. He's not baby Kawhi, which Hawks fans had hoped at first. That's totally out of the picture at this point. But he's definitely a starter in the NBA.
And that's all they need him to be right now. Of course, if he develops some self-creation chops or anything like that, but if he hits his threes and he can play defense, he was the perfect pick at that time for the Atlanta Hawks for this team. Real quick, before we talk about the player that me and Dre are most excited about, Kevin Herter, who got honestly, if he wasn't such a good guy, it would be a robbery of a contract extension. I'm sure he's happy with the money he's making. He's not upset with it whatsoever, but a lot of other guys would have Scottie Pippened the situation with the contract that he got, and he's outperforming that. I mean, he's not a lockdown wing defender, but he's not necessarily a guy you can pick on. At least not like a Bryn Forbes that you can pick on in those types of situations. And he just hits his threes. I mean, at an unremarkable mark. And honestly, I haven't paid as much attention to Herter this year as I did in the playoffs last year. I think, what was it, Game 7, he was the hero where he dropped 28, 30, something like that against the Sixers. Has he carried that over into this season? I'm sure the shot is still hitting, but has he been adding to his game at all?
Not entirely.
Sure.
Last year, like you mentioned, the playoffs, that defense really was impressive. I mean, he really was showing a lot of promise. And now his defense is a little bit more hit and miss. He still struggles with some things like finishing at the basket, and he's a little streaky sometimes. But like you mentioned, he's been lights out for the month of well, we're in April now, but throughout much of March, I mean, he really was playing well. And, time will tell. He's a young player. I think he's 23 years old. It's so hard to gauge the Hawks because so many of these guys have only been in the league for 3 or 4 years, and they're still developing. But I wouldn't say he's playing at the same playoff level as most of the country saw him last year. But it's there. We've seen it. He can definitely do that. And I wouldn't say he's regressed this season, but he's about where we expect him to be at a fourth-year shooting guard.
It's so interesting. I mean, listen, with the defense, first and foremost, he was never drafted as a defender, and he was never going to be a guy that you build your defense around. But there are people that when you build a good defensive system around them, they buy in and they try. And the Hawks have had too many moving pieces, and I think their defense has lacked because of it. And with Herter not having those pieces around him brings his defense now, mainly because he has more responsibilities and he's just not that guy. But if we're talking defense on the Hawks, it's not Deandre Hunter. There's only one guy on this team that I want to talk about, someone I genuinely believe to be like a game changer going to be once he hits his
Shout out to Chino Hills.
Onyeka Okomgwu, I mean, monstrous, man. A lot of people, listen, if you've only seen clips, you've seen the clips of him locking down Giannis. But if you've seen more than that, you're seeing a guy who's like a prototypical defensive center in the modern NBA. Undersized, but not small. Fast, lateral movement. He can work on switches. He can bang with big men. He can rebound. He defends. The offensive game will come, but you don't even necessarily need that if you've got Trae Young, who's going to set him up for everything. He figures to be essentially Clint Capella if he were in the modern game. I need to hear like a minute straight on Onyeka right now.
I'll try to give you a minute straight. I mean, he's the truth.
Yeah.
He's had the eyes of hoops junkies on him since high school, since Chino Hills, like you said, and came in last year in the playoffs and picked up everybody from Giannis to Embiid and really made his name as the lockdown defender. Yeah, he's still not quite he's still not ready to replace Clint Capella in the starting lineup. He's not there yet, but he will be, and it's clear at this point that he is the center of the future for the Atlanta Hawks, more so than Clint Capella, and I could see that change happening within 1 to 2 seasons, if not sooner. So, yeah, I mean, I totally bought all the stock in Okomgwu. He's a dog, which this team sorely lacks. For me, there are 3 players that are untouchable on the Hawks. It's Trae Young, John Collins, and Okomgwu. And I can't say enough good things about him.
Yeah,
still he's still raw. His offensive game still needs to improve a little bit. He fouls a lot on defense and gets himself in foul trouble. But he's such a young player, and his ceiling is so high. So I think he is the center of the future for the Hawks, no doubt.
Dre, give me a little bit on Onyeka. We've talked about him multiple times in the pod.
I mean, Pat basically says it. I mean, he's a terrific big man. He has a terrific IQ for the game, honestly. Pat actually answered my question because I was going to ask, what does the future hold for Capella with the Hawks, considering that Okomgwu is really ascending, and really, I mean, he really looks like the big man for the future. But, for Pat saying that, he's not there yet, I think it's kind of fair to him. But I love the ceiling of him. I mean, I know that we've praised Okomgwu many times on this pod before, and I'm just excited to see what he can do for the playoffs, even this year.
He might not be ready to take over Capella's role, but it might be forced upon him. There's a very likely chance he would have been sent at the trade deadline if he hadn't inked an extension in the offseason and was
No doubt.
ineligible at the trade deadline. And a lot of teams, I mean, the center market is up there, guys. You got Miles Turner, who could potentially get traded. John Collins was on the rumor mill. Montrezl Harrell ended up getting traded. Rudy Gobert, by the way, we're not going to talk about that in this episode, but some really heavy rumors with Rudy Gobert. If you want a center, you're going to be able to get out there. And if you want to get a playoff proven guy in Clint Capella, you could pay theoretically less than some of these other guys. And at that point, I'm sure someone would be signed. Maybe you re-sign Gorgie Dang, who's been dealing with injuries, but has been a very capable center in this league in the past, to limit some of those minutes for Okongwu. But I could see Capella getting moved as early as this offseason. And if you want me to give a pick, I would say a first-round pick and Mason Plumlee from the Hornets maybe gets that done. They've been looking for a center, and Clint Capella, listen, if you've got a young guard that's offensively talented and you want to make the playoffs in Houston and in Atlanta, you bring in Clint Capella. Maybe you do that if you're Charlotte as well. Last thing.
Hold up. You're trying to give us Plum Dog for Capella?
Hey, I'm not saying it's fair. I'm just saying the center market out here is a first-round pick. People just said, I think that was the rumors that Clint Capella could get, or Miles Turner could get you a lottery, outside the lottery pick, and Miles Turner is comparable to Clint Capella, whatever you prefer.
But you said a first-round pick, and in Nate McMillan's eyes, that means nothing.
That's true.
That means I'll talk to you in a couple of years, young buck. So no, you're right. That may be fair, but it's just like as if the Hawks are going to win now, I mean, they're basically in LeBron James territory of how they treat draft picks. They don't care.
Sure.
But
they're at that point now.
They do have enough young guys, that's for certain, with the Hawks. And I guess this all depends on what happens in the playoffs. If you guys don't sniff the play-in this year, maybe you decide to buy in on the youth a little bit more. And who am I to decide what Travis Schlenk does? He's done nothing but good moves in Atlanta since he's gotten there. I'm sure he'll make the right decision this offseason. What comes in? And speaking of what he has done, I'm wondering about a couple of guys that haven't gotten a ton of minutes but had hype out of the draft and in the G League. Are Jalen Johnson and Sharif Cooper anything?
Yeah, for sure. And that's one of the louder complaints you'll hear out of the Hawks fan base is how little we've seen the rookies. Last time I checked, Jalen Johnson was like 70-something and Sharif Cooper was like 80-something in total minutes for rookies played this season, which is just absurd.
Right.
You know, especially when the Hawks were dealing with injuries and, you know, COVID was sweeping through the NBA in December and January.
Kevin Knox is getting minutes.
Yeah, exactly. So that's been so frustrating. And then you look at what they're doing in the G League, and they're just putting up monster performances. Yeah. And I know obviously there's a difference between G League and the NBA, but man, they definitely deserve some time. And Hawks fans get so frustrated when they see players like Kevin Knox or Timothy Luwawu-Cabarrot, TLC. And, you know, they see those guys getting minutes, whereas Sharif Cooper and Jalen Johnson aren't really getting off the bench at all. And honestly, I think that is a mistake. It's been they're treating it as a redshirt year,
right?
But you know, it's frustrating because I think those guys are ready to at least play more than what they're playing right now. So obviously, that's been something that's really stuck with Hawks fans and something they're very upset with.
Yeah, all they really need is just more time on the court. But since we brought up Kevin Knox, I know this is kind of an old question, but what was the locker room? What was like, you know, like what was the circumstance around the Hawks like when Cam Reddish got traded? Because I know there was a lot of mixed emotions about that trade. You know, some people loved it, some people didn't like it, and then obviously, you know, you have this guy who was ascending as an offensive talent. He had a few 30-point games with the Hawks, but then of course, you know, you see him in New York, and then obviously, you know, he has that injury. So, like, what was it like when Cam had, got traded at the time?
It was wild because Cam Reddish was a darling of Atlanta. Like he had a cult following, Cam fam. Everybody was really high on him, and then he gets traded for not a whole lot in return. You know, draft pick and Kevin Knox, and everybody was super upset one day, and then the next day, the Athletic reports, well, actually, he quietly requested a trade in the offseason, and they finally found the right deal. And then they sent him on his way, which one was a terrible career move. You know, that going to the Knicks. You know, the injury could have happened anywhere, but man, he did not want to end up on the Knicks.
Yeah.
So that was for, you know, and then public opinion of Cam Reddish just plummeted in Atlanta overnight. And I think people might be somewhat over it now, but I still get it in my mentions all the time. He didn't want to be here. He didn't want to be here, but still, I mean, he was a key rotation player.
Yeah.
Like like y'all said, he had a couple 30-point games this season, and I still am a believer. I still think he's got an NBA career. I wish it could have been in Atlanta.
Right.
But yeah, I mean, it was wild. The public opinion on Cam Reddish swayed just overnight.
I just think it was wrong time for Cam Reddish. He is going to need extensive minutes on a bad team to develop his game, in my opinion. And I think it's going to be developed into a good game. He's clearly got touch. He's clearly got shot. I think he can run a pick and roll. The passing isn't necessarily there, but he can find his spots in the pick and roll when necessary. And that just wasn't going to happen in Atlanta. Maybe you bring him in on a Jamal Crawford sixth man type of role, but that's not how Nate McMillan plays. And it wasn't going to happen. So in the sense of maybe trying to find that somewhere else, I know Houston was heavily rumored, which I didn't super understand either, because they've got KPJ and Green that need minutes, and Wood and Şengün and all these guys that need minutes. He needs heavy touches, I think, to develop. I didn't necessarily see it. And New York, unfortunately, listen, New York with a new team, keep an eye out for assistant Johnny Bryant potentially taking over, who is going to play the young guys, and the young guys really respect him.
Yeah.
Maybe then he's got the minutes and he can develop in New York. But like you said, right now, especially with Tibbs, reigning coach of the year, by the way, Tom Thibodeau, who is not playing any of his guys and wasn't playing Cam, it's a bad look for right now. Hopefully next year something shakes out for him, because I think we're all Cam believers. He's a bucket, which isn't the entirety of the NBA, but it's certainly something, and hopefully something in New York shakes out. I'd
be remiss if I didn't say that a big component of that just wasn't his unhappiness, was that the Hawks were going to have to choose who they were going to pay. It's either going to be Deandre Hunter or Cam Reddish, and there was never any contest.
Right.
Yeah. That makes sense.
Even if Hunter isn't untouchable in your eyes, getting a young prototype of 3-and-D player is so rare on the wing in this NBA. You just have to bet on those guys whenever you can. Even if he turns out to be OG Anunoby, that's a fifth starter on a championship team.
Absolutely.
And that's what you need to choose on. So
I never thought of it like that. I never thought to compare Hunter and OG Anunoby, but it makes sense. When you think
it's
about
the same
it.
Prototype. I'm sure they've got differences in their games that, Ben Taylor could tell me that I'm an idiot for saying that. But I think that with those prototypes, those are the types of guys that you need to get in this NBA. The Mikaels, the OGs, the Deandre Hunters, if you can get them, the Pat Williams even. Man, I love Pat Will. And then the ultimate versions of that in like Scotty are the types of guys that you need to get in this NBA, whether to start your team or to complete your team. And Hunter is closer to that than Reddish. I think that's what I've got for these other storylines. I mean, Dre, did you want to say anything else? You tweeted that Sharife Cooper is a future starting point guard, if you want to mention that.
Yeah, I mean, honestly, Sharife, we can definitely go back to Sharife. Obviously, he's been doing his thing in the G League. I don't have the exact numbers in front of me, but I do know that, he's been really doing his thing. And I'm going to say, agreeing with Pat, I think it is kind of frustrating when you have young guys in the G League, obviously with the Hawks affiliate who are doing, such a tremendous job out there, but it's like, they're not getting the opportunity in the NBA. And even though, I am a big Sharife Cooper fan, I must say, even throughout the games, you could tell, like, once he stepped out on the NBA floor, his confidence wasn't really there. I don't know if it was just, the nerves in him, or, he just wasn't getting enough time or enough development on the NBA floor. But I just hope that, hopefully soon Coach McMillan will possibly find his trust in him. And then honestly give him more time, because honestly, he's not going to be able to find that rhythm and find that confidence in his game on the NBA floor unless he gets that time.
Totally agree.
17-7-4 for the College Park Skyhawks right now. The Hawks are really good at getting backup players, and that's partially why Sharife Cooper hasn't doing it. They had DeLon Wright, who's the guy that you would want off the bench for trade, just defensive minded, kind of like a Diet Coke triple-double type of guy that if they keep finding these veterans that can do that, it's going to be hard for the young guys to get minutes. But even if it's not Capella, I think there's going to be some moves for the Hawks this offseason. They've got some veterans on bigger contracts that they can package into a bigger deal, and that's what I want to talk about in the offseason here. So, John Collins, I think we've established, unless something unforgivable happens in the playoffs or with his role is going to stick around, and I think we all agree with that move. Clint Capella, he's rumored to be moved, but not necessarily will he, not necessarily should he, with Onyeka not fully ready to be moved. What else is out there? I mean, you've got Gallinari, you've got Bogdan. Is there a number one move you would like to be made in the offseason?
I'm not sure. It would have to be. We'd have to provide some level of defense.
Sure.
Because right now this roster is constructed just to pick and roll for Trey and the big men, and then knock down threes, which is great, but it just really isn't translating to any defense. So I think providing some defensive depth would be huge. And also, you got to be careful. They've really got to fit in well with Trey because, like you mentioned, that heliocentric game, he's got a very specific type of play where, you got to know your role and you've got to be willing to sacrifice. That was one of the main themes early in the season coming out of Nate McMillan's rhetoric. So, I don't know. I don't have any players targeted yet. That's an excellent question. Hopefully they do shake up the roster because at the trade deadline, I was very tough on Travis Schlenk because everybody everybody, but several teams in the Eastern Conference got better, whereas the Hawks stayed the same. And that just isn't, it's just not the recipe for success in the NBA just because it's a never ending arms race. It's never static. You always have to be getting better. You just can't stay still in the NBA. So I don't have anybody in mind in particular, but I do hope they add some pieces in the off season.
Yeah, there's people out there that could have helped, even if you don't target youth. If you don't overspend, you take the first that you got from New York, the Charlotte first, and maybe a second, and you take it over for Eric Gordon, who would have been a perfect fit in the starting lineup for the Hawks. Not that they need to buy in, win now, right now, whether that's short-sighted or not. There are guys out there that can complement the roster. Dre, is there any move you would like to see them make in the offseason, which this is early talk. There's still the playoffs. We have no idea what happens. They may win the goddamn title. We have no idea. But in the offseason, is there anything you'd like to see moved?
Nothing that I can really think of at the moment, honestly.
Any final thoughts on the Hawks before we move on to our Coach of the Year discussion from either of you?
Yeah, definitely. Okay.
No, you go ahead, please.
Okay, so I was going to ask this question. So obviously, the Hawks, they've had their inconsistencies, throughout the year, defensively, offensively, you name it. But obviously, once the playoffs come around, that necessarily doesn't matter. So I'm looking at the play-in. Obviously, Cleveland's number 8, Atlanta's number 9, Atlanta's number 8, Charlotte's 9, and Brooklyn's 10. Obviously, that may switch around before the end of the season, but I think we all kind of have confidence that the Hawks will get in. But do you see the Hawks, possibly still getting far? Because I'm looking at a Chicago team who obviously struggles against top-tier teams, but then again, it's like they lack experience. Lonzo Ball's never been in the playoffs. Who else has never been in the playoffs? Zach LaVine's never been in the postseason. So a lot of those guys on that roster lack experience. And then of course, you got other teams like Toronto, who I personally believe Atlanta can compete with Toronto, when healthy. So how much confidence do you have in the Hawks, once they get past that play and actually get into the playoffs?
That's a great question. And that's the paradoxical thing about this team. I think they'll do better in the playoffs than they would in the play-in because best 4 out of 7, I think, really fits, who they are as a team. Whereas if you're asking for them to show up for one night, you don't know who you're getting.
Sure.
And especially if you're going up against the Brooklyn Nets, then that's going to be a tough proposition. So I honestly think if they can find a way out of the play-in tournament, they could easily advance a round or two into the postseason. So all bets are off with this team. They have the best point guard the Eastern Conference has seen since prime Allen Iverson. So anything can happen, and he's proven that he's capable of carrying this team. So, I like that question. Who knows? If they make it out of play-in, all bets are off.
You wouldn't want to see the Hawks in the first round. I'll say that right now. I mean, they're a playing team, and listen, that Cavs team is nasty. One game against the Cavs, you don't know how that's going to go. Completely riding on their health, of course. Mobley is currently out with an injury, and you remove him from the equation, odds are you're probably not going to win that game. Jarrett Allen's been hurt. Of course, the season-ending loss of Ricky Rubio. They brought in Karis LeVert to replace him. He hasn't been playing well when healthy and has been injured. Sexton hasn't played the whole year. Isaac Okoro has missed time. Rajon Rondo's missed time. Which, if you forgot, Rajon Rondo was on the Cavs. He's on the Cavs. You're welcome for that reminder. But that game could be anything. But once you get to it, I mean, if they get the 7th seed, they'd play the Bucks right now, which they've played before. I wouldn't say they'd be a favorite, obviously. I personally wouldn't love to see the Hawks in the first round. I mean, I'd rather see them than the Nets just because of seeing Kevin Durant in the first round as a top 2 seed is just unfair. But young, not even just Trae Young, who's the best at this, but smaller, quick guards that are electric shooters have killed the Bucks defense for years. It's just, we play the Hornets, we get killed by LaMelo. Kyrie has torched us when Drew isn't fully guarding him, and Trae has been a thorn on our side. I really would prefer the first round to go sort of swimmingly in this Eastern Conference, of course. I mean, we're shaping up to one of the most epic Eastern Conference playoffs entirety in our lifetimes right now. But if they see the Heat, they're a very good defensive team, and Kyle Lowry is a good defensive guard, but they don't have anyone for Trae. Like, they don't have anyone that can stay in front of Trae, and that's going to bring an effect to their defense. If they end up playing the Celtics, then that's going to hurt. If they end up playing the Bulls at some point, they're going to beat the Bulls. I'm not even going to beat around the bush with that. The Bulls' injuries have really limited that roster, and if they were fully healthy, I'd give them a better shot. But at this point, calling the Hawks cohesive is probably not the correct term with how they've played this year, but they're more cohesive than a team like the Bulls that was patched together in the offseason and hasn't had a lot of minutes together with all the injuries that they're going on. We'll see where the Hawks officially place up in a week. This is Sunday, April 3rd, exactly 1 week before the end of the season, and we have a special episode for that coming next week. But for now, let's talk about some awards. Let's start with Coach of the Year, and it's a great year for Coach of the Year. I think there's several candidates. I've got my top 3 as well as 3 honorable mentions that I'll only bring up if we don't mention them in your guys' top 3s. But why don't we start with number 3? And I'll start with Dre. I'll put you on the chopping block. Who is your number 3 Coach of the Year candidate right now?
I'll say Ime Udoka. Obviously the Celtics, got off to a slow start. There were rumors about whether Jaylen Brown and Jason Tatum can coexist as a duo, but they've really switched that around over the past few months, and it's really been because of defense. Honestly, obviously the offense is going to come, but the defense has really turned up a notch, over these past few months, and I think Udoka really plays a part in that. Really preaching defense, really setting schemes, and really getting his team together, locked in defensively. So Udoka's definitely got to be top 3 for me.
Best defensive unit in the league since the All-Star break, and the national media was considering them straight up contenders to get out of the Eastern Conference before the Robert Williams injury. If you're not unaware, Williams tore his meniscus and got surgery, could return sometime in the playoffs if they get deep enough. Not that would be the move for me, especially for a guy that's dealt with injuries in the past. You should probably let him heal, but people have done it. Joel Embiid played most of the playoffs last year with a torn meniscus, and I believe Deandre Hunter left the playoffs with a torn meniscus last year as well. I had Ime in my honorable mentions. The Celtics is currently 2 games back of the 1 seed, by the way. Pat, who was your number 3 on your Coach of the Year ladder?
Number 3, Eric Spoelstra, because he was ready to throw hands with Jimmy Butler.
Yeah, dude. Wow. Spo was crazy. He's also my number 3.
Yeah.
Just some numbers for you guys. They're currently 50-28, first in the Eastern Conference. Very well could finish there as well. They've got about a 1.5 game lead on the Bucks right now with just a few games to go. And that's with 23 games missed from Jimmy Butler, 25 missed from Bam Adebayo, 17 from Kyle Lowry, and 15 from Tyler Hero. As always, the Miami Heat have success stories with the players they pick up off the street. The 3 that I'd like to mention right now are shouts out to Max Strauss, Gabe Vincent, and Omer Yurtseven, who have been fill-ins for a lot of the season, and Strauss and Vincent have been regular parts of the rotation even when the team is healthy. And I think it's not a stretch to call them defensively the most versatile team in the league. They can give you any look. They can give you zone. They can give you man-to-man. They'll give you box and one. They'll give you any type of look that you don't want and really push you for that. Spo at number 3 and could easily be number 1, but I think the other 2 on my list have done what Spoelstra have done to better effect. Pat, who's your number 2? Give me a little thoughts on why.
I'll go with Taylor Jenkins,
Yep.
Memphis Grizzlies. What they've done this season has been incredible. They're where I thought the Hawks would be at this season,
Mm.
and they're doing it while Ja Morant's missed a lot of time this season with various injuries. So I think he's looking at the overall NBA landscape. I think he is, in my eyes, the second. He'd be my second choice.
TJ from the Budenholzer coaching tree, so you know I am going to represent. They are currently 55-23 locked in. They have solidified the number 2 seed in the Western Conference, and that is 22 missed games from Ja Morant. They are 20-2 in those games. They just beat a fully healthy Suns juggernaut without Ja Morant, Jaren Jackson Jr., Desmond Bane, or Steven Adams, a game I watched, and they just beat them. Like, it wasn't fluky. It wasn't fire shooting. They made a lot of threes, but that team makes threes. It's not out of character for them to do that. They just beat them as a team. Like the Heat, they have some success stories. John Conchar, who's bounced around the league, has found a home in Memphis, just hitting threes and playing some good defense. Ziaire Williams, who they got in the Jonas Valanciunas trade, they got that pick. People were really thought that it was a reach to take him at 10. He's turned out to be a really solid player. I have no idea what his ceiling is. Jared Culver brought in over in a trade from Minnesota, who looks like an NBA player for the first time in his career. And
Let's not forget, Tyus Jones is probably the best backup point guard.
I'm saying Tyus Jones should probably be the Knicks' number 1 target in free agency, simply because it's hard to get any other. Last year was the year to get a point guard. You could have gotten De'Aaron Fox in a trade if you overpaid. You could have gotten Lonzo Ball very easily from the Pelicans. Unfortunately, there aren't guards available this crop of offseason. You should be targeting Tyus Jones, who is a free agent, by the way. But yeah, he's a fantastic backup point guard. A very Spursian team in Memphis. I looked at their roster. All 15 players on the roster I've seen used in the rotation, and I've seen them play well. Easily the deepest team in the league with one of the best point guards in the league. Dre, who's your number 2 on your list?
I mean, hell, we've already been talking about it. We got to go Taylor Jenkins, honestly, man. Like, this team is just really bought in. I love the chemistry. I love the camaraderie that this team has. I mean, I don't know. It just makes me think of after the Brooklyn game, that video where Malika Andrews is interviewing Desmond Bane, and then everybody just comes in and just does a photo bomb and everything, or does a video bomb and everything. Like, this team is really bought in. They really love playing with one another. Obviously, you know, the record 22 without Ja Morant. And let me just say this, because, you know, a lot of fans are just kind of taking this over, or just kind of overblowing this. Just because the Grizzlies have been good without Ja Morant in the regular season does not mean that they don't need him in the playoffs. I just want to clarify that, honestly. But yeah, I mean, this team is really bought in. You know, Desmond Bane could possibly be a most improved player candidate. Jaren Jackson Jr. could be a defensive player of the year candidate.
Yep.
So, like, they have a lot of great talent on this team. And I told people coming into this year that Memphis was going to make some noise, and I'm gonna say they've like really excelled that, in my opinion.
There's not a team I'd rather see and make it out of the West than Memphis. Nothing against the other teams, but Memphis is just a great vibes team in general. They had those grit and grind years. For this to be the ultimate version of a Memphis team that finally makes the finals would be incredible. Western Conference second round is going to be a bloodbath as well. I think based off of our conversations, we've all got the same number 1 person in the Coach of the Year candidate. But just in case I'm wrong, Trey, who's your number 1?
I'm going Monty Williams, man. I know a lot of people may not agree with this, because I actually posted this on Twitter, and there's a lot of people that disagree. But I mean, we got to be honest. Phoenix has the best record. They've been the most consistent team. I mean, I'm not trying to discredit any other teams like Miami or Memphis or whoever, but Monty Williams has been the best coach, in my opinion, this year. Especially considering that, coming into the year, a lot of people didn't believe Phoenix would be able to continue that momentum from the finals last year. I mean, we all know that they lost, but a lot of people didn't expect them to come back, be a top team in the in the Western Conference, and they've definitely excelled at, obviously, even with Chris Paul being out for about 6 weeks or so, and then having a guy like Cameron Payne being able to come up, which, by the way, Cameron Payne's probably right behind Tyus Jones, is probably the best backup point guard in the league, in my opinion. So, I mean, for a guy like him to be able to step up, for guys like Mikael Bridges, who was who could possibly be a defensive player of the year candidate as well. I know a lot of people don't like the fact that Devin Booker hasn't been in the MVP conversation, but he's had a pretty solid year as well. So this Phoenix team as a whole, definitely, this Phoenix team as a whole has been really solid, and you definitely got to give credit to Monty Williams.
A lot of people hating on the Suns out of the final, saying that it was a fluke, and when they started 1-3, a lot of people thought that take was correct. Obviously incorrect. Pat, do you have the same number 1 on your list?
Yeah, I'm going Monty Williams. I I listen to guys who are smarter than me on this sort of thing. I listen to y'all. I listen to players. I know the players around the league have such a high opinion of Monty Williams.
Yeah.
It's a no-brainer. It's his year. It's time for him to get his flowers.
There's a lot of people in the league that are great men but aren't great coaches, and Monty is easily both. 62-15, solidified first in the Western Conference, easily. I understand that Memphis is solidified second, and they're easily the second best team in the conference, but they haven't sniffed Phoenix's record this entire season. They only need one more win that they will surely get for the franchise record in wins in a season, and the media loves to vote for guys that do stuff like that, so I'm sure they'll be voting him. I'm sure he's the betting favorite right now. And like every other coach on here, he's dealt with missed games. 15 games without Chris Paul, who got more credit than Monty last year for the Suns' turnaround. 11 games without Devin Booker, who has been a top 7 MVP candidate, I would say at worst. And 21 games without DeAndre Ayton. Without DeAndre Ayton, you've got Chris Paul, who can turn big men into, usable guys, any of them. But the front office, big shout out to James Jones and Monty, have identified people that don't just fit the team roster-wise, but personality-wise. Just like Memphis and Heat have success stories, so do the Suns with JaVale McGee, who might be having his best season as a backup center in the league in his deep 30s. Landry Shamet, who looks like a rotation player for the first time in his career. And Bismack Biyombo, who's back in the league. And he looks great. Nothing against, Bismack was always a usable player. He just was overpaid. It's not his fault that Charlotte gave him that huge contract, but he can be a hard rim runner. He'll get you rebounds at an undersized, and he'll catch lobs. And with Chris Paul, that's a center. You got a center. Not only that, but they've got development from the two most important players that need development on that roster. Mikael Bridges has taken another step. He might be a legit shot creator at the peak of his career, which makes his ceiling far higher than anything we saw before. And Cam Johnson, has dropped 30-point games, who's hit buzzer beaters against the New York Knicks. He's got all the confidence in the world. And for a guy that, again, people said they reached for in the draft, has turned out to be great. And whether you want to say they're the best team, the most dominant team in the league, the most talented, the deepest, whatever adjective, the only one that you can't argue against is that they're the best run machine in the NBA. They are a well-oiled machine. They play the way they want to. They play at the pace they want to, both offensively and defensively. And it's very difficult. In fact, out of those, 15 losses, probably only a few of them weren't close. And at that point, you've only made them change the way they play a couple of times in the season. Easily the best team in the league this year, and Monty should run away with the award, while everyone else is, like I said, it's a great year for the Coach of the Year award, but Monty's going to run away with it. Two guys that I would like to mention, Ime Udoka was on my honorable mentions, but two guys that we haven't mentioned so far, JB Bickerstaff, who has had multiple head coaching jobs in the past as an interim and was never the guy that they chose to stick around. Notably, he was the guy that took over for Kevin McHale in Houston before they hired Mike D'Antoni, and he had a pretty good end of the season there. They had no playoff expectations, the Cavaliers, and right now they are the 7 seed, and that alone would have been an improvement for them. But that doesn't tell half the story. They've been missing games from Garland, Mobley, Allen. Obviously, we mentioned all these guys earlier, and JB Bickerstaff has been a huge part of keeping the morale up with that team and playing hard and playing good defense, which is what this team rests their laurels on. They were the top 3 seed before injuries killed them. Worst luck. Injuries have affected every team this year. COVID protocols have affected every team this year. I don't think a team has had bad enough injury luck that's a playoff team than the Cleveland Cavaliers. Dre, one thought on JB. We've talked about him on the pod before.
You basically explained it all. The Cavs coming into this year, I don't think anybody expected them to have the year that they had. They got a top draft pick in Evan Mobley. We thought that this was going to be another development year for this team, but they really they've honestly excelled expectations and overcame a lot of adversity. Because when you think about the development of obviously Mobley, Darius Garland, Jared Allen, but they also lost guys like Ricky Rubio, who at the beginning of the year had a pretty solid season to say the least. And then of course losing a guy like Colin Sexton as well. So for this team to have overcame so much and still have been able to overcome that adversity, I think it's really great to watch. And JB Biggs JB Bickerstaff at least, if not top 3, I think he's probably number 4 on my list. If I had to consider.
JB's got all of that, and don't get it twisted. It wasn't just a great season for Ricky Rubio. It was pretty damn near the best season of his career up until that injury. It really sucks for Ricky, and it is the same ACL that he has torn before. Hopefully he bounces back. He's a free agent, so if there's an inkling that he'll return during the season, Victor Oladipo got scooped up. I'm sure Ricky will get scooped up too. Hopefully it's by a team that can bring that back for him. And one other coach that I want to mention is one of my favorite themes in the NBA is coaches getting no credit for LeBron's success and then becoming just absolute masterminds on the court after they have left his shadow. Ty Lue, the Clippers have no business being in the playoffs. They have no business being competitive with no Kawhi all season, Paul George out for a majority of the season, and the rest of the team being kind of like scrapped together. They got good players, but I'm not so certain that they would make the playoffs without PG or Kawhi in any other circumstance. And they're the 8th seed. They're locked in the play-in, which is nothing against them because, like I said, they've missed their 2 best players, who aren't just their 2 best players. They're 2 top 10, 12 players that they're missing on this roster. Locked in the play-in and the comeback kings. We've seen them come back from 20. We've seen them come back from 30. They're, making the Utah Jazz break up in the summer with what they've done to them multiple times now. And quick shout out. I'm not going to shout out the whole roster, but just Reggie Jackson. Everyone said he was cooked, man. Everyone said he was cooked. And he's like the number 3 scorer on that team when the guys are healthy, which we really didn't see for Reggie. And he was putting up some good numbers in Detroit when he was first traded from OKC, but a lot of injuries limited him there. Any final thoughts on the Coach of the Year race from you two before we move on to Most Improved?
Should we give a little bit of love out up north to Chris Finch and
yeah, you're right. You're right. You're absolutely right. Yeah.
Because honestly, I mean, I'll say this, and like I've apologized to the Minnesota Timberwolves on many occasions, and I'm going to continue to. I had them as at the very bottom of the Western Conference this year, coming into the season, and for them to be in the playoff race right now, Karl-Anthony Towns is getting the respect that he deserves. Anthony Edwards is definitely getting the respect that he deserds.
Yeah, man.
Like this team is locked in, and going into early in the season when they were winning, we were all questioning whether they would keep that momentum going. But for them to be in April and really be sitting in a playoff spot it's really, really impressive.
It really is. Big shout out to Chris Finch, who was hired somewhat unceremoniously in the middle of the season last year by someone who's no longer with the team, by the way, but has turned out to be the right choice, at least so far, for this roster to get them to the playoffs, not necessarily further than that. We'll see how that goes. Most Improved, there's 2 ground rules for me. And these aren't things that you guys have to adhere to by any means, but just for the people listening, just why I made the choices I did no second-year players for me. So even though guys like Desmond Bane and Tyrese Maxey, who have been lights out this season, would obviously have improved from their first season, I didn't personally have them in my top 3 or in my 2 honorable mentions. And then I don't want anyone that's won the MVP before or has been top 3 in voting before, because at that point, listen, yes, they should be in consideration, I guess, by the definition of the award. It's just never been like that. I mean, Giannis was adding 6 points a game to his thing for 3 straight years, so he could have been MIP every single year of that. And I'm not lamenting that he hasn't. Most Improved is considered one of the lesser awards, obviously, but I just don't think that if you're an MVP candidate, top 3, you should be in the running for Most Improved as well. I've got 3 guards in mine, 3 electric guards that have been doing a lot. I've been putting you guys in the fire to start, so I'll begin at number 3. We've been talking about this team. It's Darius Garland on the Cavaliers. I'll throw out the stats for you guys real quick. He's averaging 21.5 points, which is 4.1 more than last year. 3.4 rebounds, which is 1 more than last year. 8.7 assists, which is 2.6 more than last year. It's a pretty big jump. On career high field goal shooting and free throw percentage, and even though the 3-point percentage isn't career high, it's 37.4, which is great. The Cavs are in the playoffs. He's a big part of that. One of the more electrifying guards in the East. He was a first-time All-Star this year and was very deserved of it. He is number 5 in assists per game this year. And The reason that he didn't get much higher is my second-year rule applied to him in the third year. He's a third-year player and a lottery pick. We somewhat expected this at some point, but it was enough for me to get him a mention at number 3. Pat, I saw you nod when I said Darius Garland. Is he your number 3?
He's. I don't want to give away anything. He's not my number 3, but let's say
Who's
he's
your number
on my
3?
list.
Yeah,
My
who's your
number
number
3, Tyrese Maxey.
Yeah,
Second year in the league, and he's doubled his statistics across the board. He's increased his efficiency. He's proven, well, at least before the James Harden trade, I thought really he was just such a home run in filling in that point guard position once Ben Simmons, stepped away from the team. So I'm going to put Tyrese Maxey in my number 3 spot.
With Maxey, and I didn't put him on there. I mentioned that I wasn't going to put second-year players, but with Shake Milton last year, we saw how good of a center Joel Embiid was in making any point guard with some talent look good on that roster. Then we see with Tyrese Maxey, someone with like straight up good offensive potential can do with a guy like Joel Embiid, and he's brought that over even after the Harden trade. I know they've slowed down a little bit after the first few games, which is a trend in Harden's trades before, but the fit with Harden worked with Maxey, and it wasn't necessarily because of Harden. It was Maxey embracing a slasher role, cutting a little bit more, and then shooting the open shots as opposed to taking his own. There was that game that they beat the Miami Heat without Harden or Embiid, and the Heat was relatively healthy. I believe they had everyone on the roster, and it was the Maxey show. I heard on the screen Maxey chants in Philadelphia. Live and die by the Philadelphia crowd, man, but if you do well, you're a legend there for life. Dre, who's your number 3 on this list?
So this is a guy, I don't know if he's been under the radar, but considering that this team is nowhere near in the playoff picture, I definitely think that he needs to at least get a little bit of love, and that's Anthony Simons, who has increased his scoring by 10 points. Actually, here I have the stats right in front of me. He's averaging 17.3 points, shooting at about 44% from the field and 40% from three-point range. Obviously, no Damian Lillard. Damian Lillard has been out for most of the year. CJ McCollum obviously got traded. So that guard spot really just opened up to Simons, and he's really taking advantage of it. He had a few 40-point games throughout the year. Obviously, Portland has not had a good year, dealing with injuries and everything and different trade scenarios. But Simons has probably been the most consistent factor for the Blazers this year.
I don't think, you can't really blame the losses on Simons this year. They've been trying to lose since, the first few months of the season when they decided that Dame was going to sit down for what ended up being the rest of the season with the abdominal surgery, and they were trying to cut tax, so they sent a lot of their good players out for nothing. And whether you disagree with those trades, Simons has really shown to be worth that. I think he is a legit guard scoring-wise in this league, and he's not the guy that you build for after Dame is gone, but if you do decide to blow it up and trade Dame for everything that you can, which I would personally argue is probably the right move at this point, he is someone that you can add to a young core and say it's a legit young core. And number 2 for me, I mentioned I've got old guards. It's another first-time All-Star and one of the closer statistical outputs we've seen to before Russell's first breakout is DeJounte Murray in San Antonio. Right now, the stats are 21.2 points, which is 5.5 more than last year, 8.4 rebounds, 1.3 more than last year, and 9.3 assists, which is 3.9 more than last year, a bigger jump in assists than Garland. Career high field goal percentage, not shooting great from 3, and 78.8% from free throw line isn't incredible, but it's not terrible. He is number 1 in the league in steals per game, number 4 in assists per game, number 2 in guard rebounds behind Luka per game, and number 2 in total triple doubles, 6 behind Nikola Jokic, who is a front runner for the MVP award, first time All-Star, two-way stud, an absolute monster athletically on the court, and probably would be winning this award if it wasn't for the number 1 guy who is just blown everyone apart. Pat, who do you have on your number 2, sir?
You mentioned him earlier. I'm going to go with Darius Garland. His
Yes, sir.
production's increased, efficiency's increased, and he's been the mainstay of this Cleveland Cavaliers team who they've exceeded all expectations. They've dealt with so many injuries. They tried reloading at the trade deadline, and I think he's definitely emerged as like the clear leader of that backcourt. especially given Colin Sexton's injury this year. So
Right.
I'm going to go with Darius Garland in my number 2.
And you got to give him, not obviously, I mean, he doesn't improve Mobley's defense, but a lot of Mobley's output on the offensive end has been a product of Darius Garland, and he's probably going to win Rookie of the Year part of those efforts as well. Dre, who do you have at your number 2?
At number 2, I know we're not supposed to do this 2-year rule, but I'm going to do it anyway. I mean, this guy has been super impressive this year. I got to go with Desmond Bane, man. I mean, I know this is year 2, but he's definitely another guy who's increased his scoring by a lot. I think he averaged around 9 points in his rookie year, upgraded to 18 points this year. Just really being one of the key factors for Memphis this year. In my opinion, probably the second or third option, if you want to say, honestly, throughout the season. But he's definitely had a pretty solid year. Especially on both ends of the floor. So I definitely think that he needs to give some love.
I think they put him in pick and rolls more often than JJJ. So I think second option might be somewhat accurate, but pretty clearly the third best player on that team behind the Jays on that team. And listen, that's just a rule that I get up for myself. I don't have a vote, obviously, for this. So if people want to do that, please go for it. Bane would be a perfect choice. I mean, he was a guy that got drafted at 30 or 31, I believe, last year. Already was a steal, played well, and now he's turning out to be like a guy that's going to be a starter on a championship team. I'd like to. He's like an ultimate version of Danny Green out there right now. Maybe not stature-wise, but definitely with the way that he plays, and I'd love to see his continued ascension. Number 1 is a little bit of cheating, but when I first saw it, I read a few articles for this, and I took a look at the betting odds, and this guy is running away with this right now. And I didn't really want to say it because I thought he was just – sometimes guys are just too good to be most improved. But honestly, Julius Randle won it last year while making an All-NBA team, so he was good enough for that as well. And when you look at the numbers, Ja Morant is just exploded off of what he's doing. He's averaging 8.5 more points a game than he did last year. He's at 27.6, 4.4 rebounds, plus 1.4, career highs from both field goal and three-point percentage. That latter is very important for Ja Morant because shooting has always been the question mark. Number 7 in points per game, best player on the number 2 team in the Western Conference, a born leader. I mean, everyone rallies around Ja, and that whole team has really good camaraderie, but if you had your number 1 guy be a bit of a grumper, maybe that doesn't happen in Memphis. He's quite literally the opposite of a word that I just made up and none of you understood. And an all-star starter. First time in the all-star game, first time all-star starter. Maybe this is cheating, but I don't think that he's enough of an MVP contender this year to disqualify him from my own thoughts in this sort of thing. And he is easily the betting favorite for the winner of this award. Not that has to be your personal opinion, but once I saw that and dove into the statistics, it made me realize that based off how the award is awarded, yeah, he's probably the most improved player of the year. Dre, who you got in number 1?
I can understand the Ja take, but I don't know if I necessarily put him as far as like that in that category, most improved category, honestly. I definitely love him. I think he's an MVP candidate, but I'm going to go with this guy down in San Antonio, which goes by the name of DeJounte Murray, who has definitely shown huge improvements this year, not just as a scorer, but as just an overall leader, honestly. Hang on. Dang it. I have the stats right in front of me, and I don't have it right now. Give me one moment. Good, bro. But honestly, man, I mean, DeJounte Murray has definitely taken a huge leap, in my opinion. 21 per game, 46% shooting, 9.3 assists. He's actually leading the league and has a career high of 2 steals per game.
Yep.
So, he's not only getting it done on the offensive end, but definitely getting it done on the defensive end. He's definitely limited his turnovers a little bit as well. So, DeJounte Murray, he's part of the reason why right now the Lakers are probably not going to make the playoffs, honestly. Yeah. And I just hope that he keeps the momentum going.
I love DeJounte, man. I think there was a couple of years here, and this is part of my philosophy as you're building an NBA team. There was a couple of years there where it was rumored he was up for trade simply because the Spurs didn't know what direction they were going in as a team. My personal belief is anytime a young player of potential that the team can't even realize is up there even a little bit, you overpay immediately for them. And DeJounte would fit on any other team. I feel the same way about John Collins. If he was on the market for even a second, he's a guy you overpay for if you have the resources. DeJounte is going to be He's at nearly averaging a triple-double, which we don't see. And I know they've become overrated since the 3 straight seasons of Russell Westbrook, but a young player doing that earlier in their career is as an indicator of how well they're playing and how well they're impacting the game on all ends. DeJounte Murray's probably, if you're talking about heliocentrism, he's probably a step behind that. He's not a heliocentric guy. I don't think he is. But for a guy to be able to put that up on a team with not a ton of talent beyond him, Jakob Poeltl is a fantastic rim runner and rim protector, but he's not like the number 2 on any team that's winning a title. Not that DeJounte's a number 1. The team's very interesting, and maybe it would be better for them to not get the Lakers out of the playoffs and focus on a lottery pick. But DeJounte's been unbelievable this year. Patrick, sir, who was your number 1 on their list?
I'm a fan of hot takes, so
yes, please.
Get ready for it. Drum roll. Miles Bridges.
Yeah.
Charlotte Hornets, my man.
Okay.
In his 4th year, he's taken a huge leap this season, up from 12.7 points per game to 20.3. He's increased his rebounds, his assists. He's definitely in the shadow, not only of his younger teammate, LaMelo Ball, but he's also in the shadow of the 2018 draft class, behind Luka and behind Trey. But if you look at that draft class, I know they're not related, but Mikael and Miles Bridges are right there. They're 3 and 4, however you want to rank them.
Yeah.
Miles Bridges has had a great season. I think we should look to the Southeast Division for our most improved player.
Miles Bridges, he's in my honorable mentions. He's averaging 7.6 points more than he did last year, 1.1 rebounds, 1.6 assists, higher, 20-plus scorer, like you said, for the first time of his career. And when you've got a forward that can score like this, your team, your outlook as a team completely changes. He could have easily been an all-star this year. The Eastern Conference was packed with almost all-stars, but Bridges, if he had made it, there wouldn't have been a ton of complaints, I can't imagine, and he's going to get better, too. He's got the build, theoretically, to be a defender when he wants to be. That's going to depend on the rest of the defensive firepower on the Hornets and what Borrego wants to do, because I like Borrego as a coach. He's from the Spurs ilk, and this team is going to make the playoffs, and he's been doing that. But a lot of his decisions are not necessarily where they are so far, specifically not treating LaMelo heliocentric, but Miles Bridges easily could win this award, and he was one of my honorable mentions as a forward. The other honorable mention I've got is another forward who was running away with this award at the beginning of the year and has cooled off a little bit, but I think I want to give a shout out to Kyle Kuzma, who's really been doing things for the Wizards this year. 4.2 added to his points per game, 2.6 to his assists, 2.4 to his rebounds, all really, elevating his game. The eye test looks legit. He looks like a starting power forward in this league, which, despite putting up 17 points in his sophomore year with the Lakers, this is his 4th or 5th year now, I want to say, I don't think he ever looked like a legitimate starting power forward that season, and he really does look it now. 5 games over 15 rebounds this season, including a 27-point, 22-rebound game in January where he was just gaming dudes. Big shout out to Kyle. He's not going to win the award, probably won't be top 3, but I did want to shout him out because escaping the Lakers and improving is something that almost every single one of those kids have done. Shout out to Lonzo, Ingram, and Caruso, Larry Nance even, Julius Randle even. So it's cool that Kyle Kuzma is continuing that tradition. Was there anyone else that you guys wanted to mention for the honorable mentions of the most improved player list?
Well, since you mentioned John Morant earlier, I'm going to mention a guy that is in the same draft class. And I know his team has been terrible this year, especially after a great year that they had last year, but he's definitely made his improvements and has been the most consistent player on the team this year. RJ Barrett for the New York Knicks.
Yeah.
Well, in my opinion, he's definitely not top 3 or maybe not even top 5 as far as if you want to do a most improved player list, but I think he's definitely made his big improvements. Averaging 20 a game. His shooting numbers has gone a little down. He's shooting 40% compared to, I think, 44 a season ago, but I don't know. For me, just watching the eye test, it's the confidence to me, just being able to, just get more comfortable taking outside shots, being more comfortable getting to the rim, because, I don't know. It's a lot of people were really hard on RJ, over the first few years, whether he will develop into an all-star talent. We all know that he's not an all-star yet, but the way that he has been looking, particularly after the all-star break, he's definitely going to at least possibly push for that all-star spot next year.
Yeah, I don't disagree. He's easily the future of the New York Knicks, and it's no longer Julius Randle. Kind of an ugly divorce they're headed towards this summer, I think. But
Mhm.
Arj is a guy you build around. Two-way wing, scoring potency, and a leader. More of a leader than Julius Randle has ever been on the New York Knicks. And I don't mean to bag on Randle. Sorry, I follow a lot of Knicks people on Twitter, and it's just really disheartening to see how low they've fallen with that team because they were such a good vibes team last year, and Randle won MIP, was third team All NBA, certainly deserved it too. But RJ Barrett, I don't think this type of regression that Julius Randle is experiencing now is possible for a guy of RJ Barrett's stature simply because he works so hard in his game and he cares so much about his teammates and he cares so much about winning that he's only going to get better. The young Knicks, something that we haven't said in a long time, have some real talent to them. Pat, was there anyone else you wanted to mention?
No, no one, not a single other player in the league is worthy. No, I'm just playing. No, I'm gonna go with my top three.
Yeah, I think we're good there. And I think that pretty much wraps it up. I do have one final question for PB&J that I ask every guest. But before I do, Dre, was there anything else you wanted to ask?
No, let me just first of all highlight Pat. Let me definitely give him his flowers. He's
Do
definitely
it.
done a great job, covering the Hawks this season. Really, really just giving us a lot of detail and a lot of information inside the locker room or inside the press conference. So, Pat, we definitely appreciate you. We definitely got to have you on again to come soon in the future.
For
You
sure.
can
Thank you so
find
much.
Pat at Pat_Benson_Jr. on Twitter. It will be tweeted out from our Twitter account, as well as all Hawks through Sports Illustrated. Like I mentioned, there have been within the last 24 hours, one, two, three, like 6, 7 stories posted on there. So we linked, if you're watching on video, we had those articles popped up for a lot of it. In terms of preparation for this, there really wasn't a better way to prepare than reading Pat's articles to get a day-to-day thought on how the Hawks are doing. And if that's something that interests you and you like this podcast and want to hear some of those thoughts flesh out a little bit deeper, we'll have that linked in the tweets as well. Check out Kobe's sneaker history between 1996 and what was it, 2020, 2000?
Mhm.
2020 on Amazon. We'll shoot you guys a link for that as well. Is there anything else you'd like to plug, Pat?
Yeah, I'd just like to say thank y'all so much for having me. I'd like to say Hoop Truth or Pod, the only podcast that matters. That's the only one that matters. It's the only one you
You
should
already
listen
know.
to. Download, rate, subscribe,
Yes.
unsubscribe, then subscribe again, share it, and thanks again, guys. Please, anytime you want to talk Hawks or talk hoops or whatever, talk Euphoria, hit me up.
We certainly will. And one last question for you. Like
Yeah.
you mentioned, is the Hoop Truther Pod. It's a framing device, but we do believe in conspiracies on this podcast. Is there a singular NBA conspiracy? It can be little, it can be big, it can be out of nowhere that you truthfully believe in?
Yeah, I think there are powers that be working against Trae Young. I mentioned that earlier.
Yeah.
That he was kept off the All-Star game, even though it was in Atlanta, even though they needed players. He's kept off Team USA. I think he pissed off Lloyd Pierce, and
Oh, yeah.
yeah, and Lloyd Pierce is super connected. He's really tight with Rick Carlisle, Greg
Yeah.
Popovich, Team USA. I think it was if you want to call it a misstep, a rare misstep by Trey, which has cost him big time. And I think there's definitely old powers that are actively working against Trey Young. That's my hoop truth conspiracy theory.
Wow, that is so like on base. Like that has very much merit to it. And that Team USA group does work behind the scenes. I don't know if you guys saw that report from earlier this week where it looks like Coach K might have pulled the strings behind the scenes with Team USA basketball to have Sam Hinkie removed from the Sixers ownership group and replaced with Team USA cohort Brian Colangelo. So that's
Oh
definitely something
wow.
that's happened. Yeah.
Also,
Um,
don't forget Team USA. It's Nike. I think there was one player on the entire roster who wasn't Nike. It was Zach LaVine, and technically he was a sneaker free agent. Trae Young's the signature athlete of Adidas, so keep that in
Ah,
mind as well.
Very interesting conspiracies from PB&J. Once again, everything that you can find them on will be tweeted out from our account that you can follow at HoopTrutherPod on Twitter. I'd like to thank Pat for joining us one last time. So welcome. We are going to be hitting into the plug zone now. Dre, do you have an article of the week for us?
Yes, this is from a guy who was on our first episode. Shout out to Mark Schindler, who recently wrote an article, actually just on April 2nd. Just basically talking about the development of Wendell Carter Jr. Out in Orlando.
Oh, yeah.
Mark is honestly, I know he covers the Pacers, but he seems like he's a really big Orlando Magic fan. Obviously, with a lot of great young players there. And today, in this particular article, he highlights, Wendell Carter Jr. He definitely highlights, his shooting, saying his post game and everything. So yeah, definitely shout out to Mark for that awesome article. I read it yesterday in full, and I enjoyed it a lot.
I've got an article from The Athletic, just good writing all around from William Geary about the Pelicans pushing for the play-in and how much their youth is heading behind it. They've got great young players like Herb Jones really doing stuff, Jose Alvarado, who's been doing things lately, and I haven't been paying much attention to the Pelicans. I've told you guys before on this podcast that when I don't consume games of a team, I'll try to consume more of their content outside of it just so I can get an understanding of the team. I think this article does a really good job of that. And both of those, Schindler's post and as well as this one, will be in our tweets. We'll tweet out the plug zone later on in the day. This will be dropping on Monday, April the 3rd. And I think to close off this game, we can have a couple of thoughts. And I've got I have a game that we're going to play at the pod. But first, some Sixers players are not feeling Doc Rivers. How do you feel about that, Trey?
I'm not surprised. I'm honestly not surprised at all. The Sixers have gone through, a big transition, since the Ben Simmons James Harden trade, and obviously, with Harden not playing up to his standards over the past, I think 11 games or so. There's been a lot of issues, between the Sixers and that locker room. Obviously, Doc Rivers. I wouldn't say that he necessarily called out James Harden in that in that press conference.
Yeah, I think that was overblown.
Yeah. I don't think he necessarily called him out, but he because I think the reporter asked about the second unit, the issues with the second unit, but he was saying that it was mostly James. I don't think it was him calling him out, but I don't know, man. It's Doc Rivers is on the hot seat this year, in my opinion. I agree. If the Sixers can't at least get past the second round again, he's got to go, unfortunately. I know that, in his 2 years, Joel Embiid has excelled as an MVP candidate, but at the end of the day, it hasn't really resulted in a lot of winning, honestly. We obviously know what happened last year, right, in the semifinals when they lost to Atlanta. 3-1. And now obviously this year with Joel Embiid, having the type of season that he's having, Tyrese Maxey having the type of season he's having, but now all of a sudden, you have this team, James Harden's not, for some reason, isn't flourishing with the team. So Philly's in a really weird position right now because, this is a team, obviously after the trade who had a lot of expectations to really take over the East, but it hasn't really looked like that whatsoever over the past few weeks. So it'll be interesting to see how things unfold after this year.
We'll see about that. It's interesting with the Sixers. They still have every chance to get out of the Eastern Conference, but I'm not sure they will. You guys know my opinion. I've said this multiple times. Instead of giving up on Simmons, which is what they did before they tried to bring him back last year after the playoffs, I seriously think Doc Rivers should have been fired. I just don't think he's the fit for that team. I don't think he's a winning coach. He's won a title, but he's had far more talented teams that haven't done anything. The Lob City Clippers didn't do shit. They never made it to the conference finals under Doc Rivers. I really think that there should be something else. So now we've got a Hoop Truther conspiracy. Tim Bontemps. They asked the Eastern Conference contenders if they were fully vaccinated, and the Heat and Bucks said that they were, and I would assume that they're not lying about that. The Celtics and 76ers declined to do so, meaning that they likely have players or one player that is not vaccinated. And that's very interesting. Obviously, we know in Brooklyn, Kyrie's not vaccinated and wouldn't be able to play. Toronto's in the playoffs, baby. Toronto right now, look here, NBA standings. They are currently 5th. The Sixers in the first round. As of today's standings, which means if the Sixers aren't vaccinated, there's a very real chance that there's a player that won't be able to play. So why don't we play a little game here? We know that Kyrie in Brooklyn isn't vaccinated. Boston, you sent me a clip or a clip from an article of Jalen's, I would say, vague comments about how it's a personal choice and he respects people that don't get it, but never confirmed himself he doesn't get it. So I think we're safe to assume that the Celtics, Jaylen Brown, is not vaccinated. I don't mean safe to say like it's for sure. I just say like if we're assuming someone isn't vaccinated on the Celtics, from what we've seen publicly, Jaylen Brown makes sense to be that guy. And that would be a huge issue for the Celtics if they do not have Brown for road games in a matchup with the Toronto Raptors. But who on the Philadelphia 76ers is not vaccinated? Now let's go through the big ones. Joel Embiid, I think, is a smart guy, and I don't think he is unvaccinated. With James Harden, not that he's necessarily a smart guy. I just think he hits the club too much to not be vaccinated. The guy would have had Rona like 8 times by now if he wasn't vaxxed. So I don't think it's Harden either. I've got the roster pulled up here, Dre. Is there anyone that jumps out as like a for sure not vaccinated for you?
Honestly, I've been trying to figure that out though, because I don't know. It's like, when you look at this guy, when you look at this roster, you would look and be like, oh, I mean, they don't seem like the type that wouldn't get the vaccine. I don't know. It's like, you don't want to assume, but then again, it's like you do at the same time. I know I mentioned before, when we were both talking the other day, maybe Tobias Harris isn't vaccinated. I don't know. Right. I mean, that would be one of the names. I don't know about Thibault. I don't know if he would be unvaccinated or not. I wouldn't. I probably wouldn't put him on my list. How about who else is on there? Jeez, I'm trying to think.
Danny Green is interesting.
Yeah, Danny Green. I think Danny Green is vaccinated. I think he is personally.
Okay, I think so. I think they said that Tobias Harris is vaccinated. Let's look.
How about George Niang?
Yeah, let's look up Niang vaccination. Not that they're all being reported, but they say Niang is vaccinated. So let's look at Danny Green, who you think, and I would agree as well, vaccination.
What'd you think, Shake Milton?
Maybe Shake, but I feel like
I don't know.
Danny revealed. So on December 22nd, Danny Green revealed that. Hold on. Let's see. There should be a quote. Okay, here's a quote from Danny Green on December of 2021, so this past December. Talk to certain guys who may not be vaccinated because Toronto, Canada is having a thing now that you can't enter the country unless you're vaccinated and had the booster shot. That may affect us if we end up playing there a couple of times or if we end up playing them in the playoffs. So we have guys, that's plural, guys on our team that are not vaccinated. You really have to start thinking, you really have to think about that in the future ahead of time. But yeah, guys are starting to take the booster shots now. Guys are starting to see different things happening. So this is in December, which means it's before the Harden trade, and he could be referring to Ben Simmons, who I believe was unvaccinated before he was traded to Brooklyn and got vaccinated after that, but he wasn't playing the entire season. So I can't imagine that Danny Green was referring to him either. And so, and it's not Danny Green. Obviously, Danny Green's not speaking out on it. I think it would have been leaked by now if it was Joel. Paul wasn't on the team until then. So I'll go with, if I had to guess anyone, I'm going to go with Furkan Korkmaz.
Korkmaz? I can see that.
Yeah. Well, let's do one quick Google, see if it's on there or not, and we'll give up because this is a whatever fucking segment anyways. Yeah. Vaccination status.
This is so bad because, I mean, we're basically just assuming, man. Oh, man. But if I chose one, I'll probably say Niang.
He says that he is, but who knows? I mean, we've seen people lie about that before, So that's about what we've got there. That's pretty much it. Any final thoughts for you, Dre, before we finish up this pod?
Not that I can think of, man. I think we just about touched on everything.
It's a great episode. Tune in next week, Sunday, for a special guest joining us for drunk episode of awards season. We'll be debating MVP, DPOY, Sixth Man of the Year, Rookie of the Year, all drunk with a special guest on Dre's birthday next week, Sunday. Thank you for tuning in. Follow us at Hoop Truther Pod on Twitter. It's Hoop Truther Studios on YouTube. Give us a like and subscription if you would be so kind. If you're watching on video, and give us 5 stars on Apple or any other podcast site that you're using to listen to us. That'll wrap up for us today. We'll catch you next week. Deuces.
Deuces.